The Guns on Pegs podcast is brought to you by iTap Group. Hello, and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast with me, George Brown.
And me, Chris Horn.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. I'm last minute back-to-back invite, so I've kicked off in style.
Oh, yeah, so that's sort of all right. Yes, okay. So for those of us who've not been fortunate enough to have back-to-back days already this season, tell us about them.
I don't think much needs to be said. Everyone knows it's really enjoyable doing that. It was a really lovely team at a place in Wiltshire with one of our investors, which is absolutely incredible. Lovely atmosphere, lovely group. Finished off in the pub after on the first day, big dinner party going late into the night, and then got up in the morning and did it all again. And it's reminded me in life what's important, I think.
Well, yes, I should think it jolly well did. I think I owe you an apology because I think when I recorded with the guys the other week, I think I thought you were going on a grouse day, so I was very rude about you. I think you were doing back-to-back grouse, but you were not shooting grouse, were you?
I don't mind you being rude about me. It wouldn't be the first time, George. And I'm unfortunate it wasn't back-to-back grouse. That would have been the only way we could have topped that experience last weekend.
Yes.
And I'm sorry about your grouse day, which we haven't actually mentioned face to face at all. We've just completely skirted around it.
Do you know what? I a bit like last year when I started hearing the sort of heather beetle chat, I just thought, I feel like this might not happen, and I kind of resigned myself to it by the time I got the news. And as I've said many times now, you can't miss what you never had, and so that first grouse day will happen at some point in the next, 2 to 45 years. It will happen, but not this year. So
you say you can't miss what you never had. I think if you get geared up for it every year, there'll be a point where you definitely can miss what you never had.
Yeah, I mean, I was just doing a little tot up. I think I've got a dozen shoot dates in the diary for this year. I don't feel like I'm going to be lacking in shooting.
Yeah. And when's your first day at home?
First day at home is the 13th of October, which is going to be, almost exactly a month. Yeah, I'm very excited. Mainly just thinking about what I'm going to do for 11s. I try and contribute everything that I can for the shoot, but, what with kids and being in London a couple of days a week and that sort of thing, I'm not really able to do that much in the way of looking after birds or anything. But I always feel like I can contribute when it comes to 11s. So my dad and I have got lots of slow and damson and all that sort of thing on the brew for later in the year. And I'm just thinking about whether we're going to do pheasant or partridge or muntjac or all of the above for the 11s on the first day.
Do you know what you should do? Seeing as it's been like the best part of a year since you last did it, you should just come out with a big hurrah and then be like, "I'm delighted to give you vegan sausage rolls," and see if anyone goes, "Gosh, you've changed," or whether they know it's a joke straight away.
Just mushroom tarts all around,
and then have like your full fallow deer on the logs behind the thing or something.
Stealth fallow.
Literally, yeah, the other side of the wood.
That would be very fun.
Anyway,
yeah, just a whole one on the asado like last year. Yeah. That would be quite fun. Anyway, better get on with it. Would you like to introduce our guest?
Yeah, we've got a big time guest today. Our guest today is a farmer and a public affairs expert. He spent many years at the NFU, first as head of government affairs, latterly as director of EU exit and international trade, then Director of Trade and Business Strategy, and finally Director of Strategy overall. So that obviously put him in very good shoes to, in March, join the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust as Chief Executive Officer. So a really big, warm welcome, please, to Nick von Westenholz. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you with us, Nick. And it's always been a sort of point of some shame that we've now done over 100 episodes, and it's the first time we've had someone from the GWCT on.
Is that right?
It is, yeah.
How's that That can't be the case.
We tried to set it up with Teresa a few times when she was in your chair, Nick, and the dates just never quite lined up. I've asked one or two others from the GWC team as well, and they always pointed me back in the direction of Teresa. But I'm very pleased that we've managed to get Nick to come on so earlier in his tenure.
Hold on, George. Was Andrew Gilruth not at the GWCT?
Oh, you're right.
Before he left,
I feel much less guilty now.
Before he left to go and do moorland activities. So, yeah, maybe he was. Anyway, welcome, Nick. To be honest, out of all of the things we could talk about, given that there might have only been one guest, the GWCT gets an enormous amount of airtime on this pod anyway, so you'll be pleased to hear that much.
Very good.
Nick, have you got a lot of shooting in the calendar so far for the year? I imagine that being the CEO of GWCT comes with some fairly decent perks on the shooting front, or are they yet to materialise?
One or two has materialised, but not in the great swathes that you might imagine in your dreams. I mean, hopefully, I'm going to be busy with lots of stuff as well. So, there's making room for it might be a bit tricky as well. But
we could go through your calendar now and then sort of read out the available dates just in case anyone's up for inviting.
Well, do you know what? I always find you have sort of certain years where everybody invites you on the same date. And then you have certain years where it all falls beautifully and everybody sort of staggers it in the perfect way. And you can say yes to everything. And I'm having one of the former years, I think. It's just one of those years where it all seems to coalesce around one or two weekends. And so, you've had to take the first ones that have come through. So there are a few probably open weekends still that I could fill. I've got more than enough to keep me happy, if I'm honest.
It's so true how those days, each season is totally different. Like, for many years, I would never really shoot much in January. And then last year, like 2/3 of my season occurred in January. And it was just one of those things where I can't explain it. And this year, I'm having one of those ones where lots of them are nicely spaced, which is much to... I think my wife feels like there's more shooting in the calendar if they're nicely spaced, which is maybe a problem.
Yeah.
Right, Nick, so the way we like to kick these podcasts off is with a round of What's That You're Drinking? So I'm going to turn to you first. What have you got in your glass?
Well, I've got a slightly guilty secret because I've got to get in a car a bit later and drive and go and pick somebody up. So I did pull out. I quite like recently, last couple of years, these sort of hazy pale ales that have become quite fashionable. Sort of in my mind, in my very sort of Philistine mind, it's sort of halfway between a kind of proper bitter ale and a lager. And these ones are quite nice, which is Northern Monk Faith. But I'm not going to drink that now because I'm going to have it later when I get back from the trip I've got to make later. And so I've got, I've just got a Lucky Saint, 0.5% alcohol free essentially. But they're quite good. I mean, I don't know if you've discussed it previously, but I think non-alcoholic beers or low alcoholic beers have just come on incredibly in the last few years, and actually they're pretty drinkable. A lot of them. The Lucky Saint ones I quite like. So I've got a Lucky Saint lager.
I really agree. I think in the last 12 months, I've noticed a big difference in the quality of them, and I think it's probably as much that as the acceptance or the feeling of them. It's probably a bit of a social thing as well. We were all sat in the pub on Saturday afternoon because we were driving back after that second day, and pretty much everyone had a non-alcoholic beer, but it still made the pub occasion feel like a pub occasion.
Yeah,
and they taste good enough. I think the problem was maybe 3 or 4 years ago when actually it was worse than having an orange juice and lemonade.
Yeah, I genuinely think some of them are perfectly drinkable. And as you say, I've noticed the last couple of seasons, actually, rightly, you've had to lay on non-alcoholic beer at, lunch and lenses and tea, whatever, because that amount of people who are driving to and fro. And as you say, I mean, actually means you can sort of have a drink and join in without having to take any alcohol on board.
Yeah. Lucky Saint's one of the better ones, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. It's good. As I say, I think actually there's lots of quite good ones out there. And then, as I mentioned, the sort of pale ales, the hazy pale ales, what they call the session pale ales, I'm really into at the moment. But they've now begun to produce a few of those zero alcohol or 0.5% alcohol, which are really good because you've got flavour in that. They're more flavoury beers.
Yeah.
You can actually, I think it gives you a bit of leeway. And I tell you what I really like is the Guinness Zero. Is it called Guinness Zero? I mean, if you have that alongside a proper Guinness, it tastes different. But if you don't, if you just pick one up and have it fresh, as it were, I mean, it's pretty close.
Yeah. You've just taken the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say that. It's still my favourite of the non-alcoholics, and that is the way you need to do it. Do not have it. I don't have one Guinness and then go, it's all right, I'll move to zero. Don't do that. Just go straight with it. Embrace it. Yeah. But I think that's the best of the non-alcoholics still. I want to try this Impossible Brew stuff. Have you heard about this?
No.
What's that?
It's getting a fair bit of airtime, probably because it's all paid marketing, but it's sort of winning me over. But it's one of those ones where it claims to do all sorts of other things for your health. So I don't know.
Oh, health beer.
Almost. I don't know. I'm gonna go buy some. I was only just in my sample of 2, seeing if either of you tried it. So it would have saved me 25 quid of delivery or whatever it's going to cost to get a certain amount delivered.
Yeah. So what have you got, Chris?
Oh, good question. Do you know what? I've got a beer that I don't think I've had in the pod before, and I don't know how, but I have a London Pride.
A London Pride.
Nice and cold. The way I like it. I don't like them that warm. Especially not whilst we're in September. But everyone knows it, and it's a winning beer.
It's a very nice beer. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's particularly. I suppose I've seen it in some shoot rooms, probably.
I kind of feel like you see it everywhere. But I think it's an absolute winner. I forgot I was about to say it feels like such a rugby beer, and then I've just seen on it official beer partner of the Premiership. So yeah, cool.
Yes. It's funny how there's rugby beers and cricket beers and so on. That's an interesting point.
Well, I guess the Fuller's Brewery is pretty well. It's not that close to Twickenham, but for breweries, it's pretty close to Twickenham.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. And George, what are you on?
Well, I'm not on a no alcohol beer, but I am on a low alcohol beer. And it's also a proper supermarket lager as well, because I've definitely seen them in the supermarket. I don't know how this one ended up in my house, actually. I didn't buy it, but it's here. So it's a small beer. Have you seen this brand?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got quite into those. Some of those are really good. They're like 2.3%, aren't they?
Yeah, so this is the lager, and it's 2.1 ABV. And it's wonderful. It's just really nice. It's nice and fruity. It's crisp. It's just really nice.
What's small about it? The alcohol content.
I was hoping you'd ask, because now I get to show off my history knowledge. So back in the day when people drank beer instead of water because the water would kill you because it's full of bacteria, a small beer was a very low alcohol beer that was kind of your everyday drink. You'd have it for breakfast or whatever. And then I don't know what the opposite was. I ought to know. But just ale, I guess, was your actually boozy beer. So small beer was your soft drink.
And here's something for you. When I was reading up on low or no alcohol beers the other day, they were talking about like the low drink drive limit in Scotland and the fact that a lot of them are 0.05% or whatever they are. And they were saying, wow, they're completely alcohol free. Surely that's a risk. And then they showed, did you realize a hamburger is the equivalent of 0.4% alcohol if you were to breathalyze? And they were talking about the existence of alcohol in a lot of our foods and how actually low alcohol beer, it's funny because we would just associate alcohol, but you never talk about alcohol in food, and actually this exists. And I just had no idea that there was more alcohol in a burger than there was in most of these beers that were low alcohol.
So now that we've all got a drink, Nick, we are going to turn to our email inbox for a round of Whose Bird Is It Anyway? This is the segment of the podcast where we ask our listeners to write in with their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas, and we do our best to help them out with some advice. Chris, over to you.
So this one comes from someone that George has called Jeeves. I think we've had a Jeeves before, George, but anyway. Hello, chaps. I find myself in a slight quandary. Being always on the lookout for single pegs on game days, and the idea of a roving syndicate greatly appealed to me, making the usual sealed off sort of full team only days available to the likes of lonely old me. After a few months of reading each advert posted in this roving syndicate group, flicking through the beautiful images of Parkland, etc., often thinking, that looks lovely, but, yes, I can't afford another one, I realised the group's potentially dark, potentially publicly well-known, just not to me, secret. The person running the group, who I'll leave nameless as is the tradition on the pod, was booking full team days for 10 guns and selling 9 of them at an inflated cost in order to render their own peg completely free. My gut reaction is that this is disgusting, but having spat my dummy well and truly out, part of me now thinks this may be jealousy. Why didn't I think of that? My questions, which I hope may be answerable by your honourable selves, are thus: is this practice of booking a full team day and making your fellow guns pay for your peg actually commonplace? 2, is it gentlemanly? For clarity, I have no issue with paying for the services of sporting agents who typically attend the shoot day in a guest capacity and look after each gun's respective interests, or even improve the day by hosting or hospitality, though importantly not shooting a peg themselves. Many thanks in advance for any time spent pondering this. Right. The most outspoken. I can't go first. Nick, over to you.
I'm not sure I quite followed that.
I'll summarize. Basically, he's found himself in a group, like some sort of WhatsApp group or something, where people are selling day, or this person's selling days to the syndicate. And it turns out the person sort of pushing the days out there is not paying for them and is basically getting everyone else to cover his peg in return for something, a level of effort. I think is probably the only way of putting it at this stage, because that's probably something to discuss. And so this person's sort of getting everyone to pay for their shooting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he just sounds he's sort of enterprising guy. I mean, I think if it was me, I would, probably leave the WhatsApp group or the syndicate pretty sharpish, or more likely just everybody leave and then reconstitute yourself without him, and then all play the right the right amount.
Much better idea.
It's a great idea. Message every single person on the group with a link to the new group. So his first question is it commonplace?
Yeah.
I can't say this is commonplace whatsoever. I definitely have heard of it before.
I was going to say, I wouldn't say it's like there's lots of it going on, but there's certainly plenty. I think there's a lot of sharp practice out there. I mean, I don't know if I've told this story before. I might stop me if I have, Chris, but the reason we ended up with our salmon fishing week that we've got is because a very long time ago, the person who had it before my dad had sort of answered an advert in the back of Trout and Salmon or something, and got it just as a sort of extra rod to make up the numbers. And at the end of the week, the head rod collected in all the tips for the gillies, whereupon my dad's mate spotted that all the gillies were looking a bit miserable after they'd had their envelope. And it turned out that this guy had basically skimmed, like 90% of the tip money, and had done it to the housekeeping staff. So it was then, it was my dad's mate who kind of revealed all, and that's how he ended up with the week that we then inherited from him.
Profitable salmon fishing. Who knew it?
Well, yeah. So I think there is quite a bit of this kind of thing goes on, really, some shady practice.
Yeah, okay, so his second question is it gentlemanly? All I can say, I'll say more than this, but my first point is everyone I know where I've heard of this happening suddenly fool doesn't have many friends much longer. So what's the definition of gentlemanly?
I imagine there's a load of people listening now who are suddenly questioning the guy who's running their syndicate.
We should
who's also the treasurer and
exactly.
the rest of it. Actually, there's maybe a little bit more scrutiny needed.
I'm just wondering though, if he'd been up front, right? If he said, "Listen, I've started this group. I'm going to do all the research. I'm going to do all the admin. I'm going to get it all organized and so on. And the deal is, you each pay 10% more than you otherwise would do, and I'm going to shoot a peg." Do you think that would be? I mean, well, it gives everybody the opportunity to decide whether they're happy to subsidize this bloke shooting, for one. But do you think that's better?
Surely this just leaves a bad taste after a while. What nearly always happens in a syndicate is that job just rotates around the syndicate each year or each day or whatever, so that everyone's putting in their effort, having their mark and all that sort of stuff. And that's what makes a syndicate fun. It's sharing that load. The moment you feel like you're indebted to someone or someone's you've been charged for a service, that dynamic changes amongst friends.
That's very true. Yeah.
Can I just make a suggestion for a second? This is a great use of guns on pegs if you're not even booking shooting, is to go and Google your shooting just to double check if you can see any dates to see
what the price ought to be.
What the price ought to be. So you can whack a screenshot on your WhatsApp group and leave it there.
So I think we're fairly yes. So we think it is ungentlemanly, clearly. And we also think it's probably more common than you might think.
It's certainly not commonplace, but it certainly goes on. Anything else to add? I mean, Nick, what do you really think if your friend, if one of your so-called friends did this, what would you'd leave the WhatsApp group?
That was the thought going through my mind. I mean, I think if there's a bunch of you, there's 9 of you or 10 of you or whatever, and one of you is getting free shooting at the off the credit of everybody else, that doesn't seem to me that that's a kind of recipe for a close-knit bunch of pals having good time shooting together. So I think that's undermine the cohesiveness of the of the gang a little bit.
So our advice to Jeeves, George, do you want to summarize?
Well, leave the syndicate immediately. Start your own. Pull the same scam on everyone else. No, I would have a quiet word. I think.
I think Nick's advice is bang on. Just leave the group. Send everyone else a message. Just say this is what's going on. If you are aware, stay in the group. If you're not, I'm doing one up over here. We're going to take it in turns. Do it the proper way.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Right. Well, I've got an unpopular opinion to share. Do you want to hear it?
Go on. Yeah.
Okay. So this is coming from somebody I've called Bran, who has written, "Hi, folks. I'm not sure whether the following email will land in the Whose Bird Is It Anyway or unpopular opinion section. I shall leave that up to your very well-informed determination." Well, now you know. This email is about the attitude of quite a few members of our sport towards certain gun dog breeds / groups. I'm a native of the Emerald Isle and have worked, trained, trialled and loved hunt, point, retrieve breeds for over 30 years, mainly German Shorthair Pointers and Bracco Italiano. I've worked my dogs in almost every shooting environment you can think of, from grand estates for members of the royal family to just knocking about the fields with friends and everything in between. In that time, I've trained and owned an international field trial champion, bred and produced a number of search and rescue dogs, and had the best companions in the field that anyone could have asked for. HPRs are true do-it-all dogs, equally comfortable in the beating line as they are in the picking up team, or hunting vast open areas for game, or recovering wounded or downed deer, or even wildfowling on the marshes. My wife tells me on a regular basis that if my dogs ever learnt to shoot, I would become obsolete overnight. I'm not saying that they'll outperform a Labrador at retrieving, or a Springer Spaniel at ploughing through dense, hard cover, or a Bavarian mountain dog at following a blood trail, but I can hand on heart say they will do all of the above 90% as well as any specialist or specific dog breed. I believe it's such a shame that there are still people out there that consider any dog that's not a Labrador or a Springer or Cocker and not worth giving the time of day. I don't really comprehend why they can't simply enjoy the variety, fun, and entertaining spirit that different dogs bring to the day. In fact, some of the fondest memories from the field include seeing non-gun dog breed working on shoots, carrying out tasks that were in total contradiction to their original purpose, such as border collies picking up on partridge shoots and a St. Bernard ploughing through the cover in order to flush woodcock to waiting guns. Should we allow this attitude/opinion to continue? After all, everyone's entitled to their opinion, or should we collectively, as a community, rebuke it?
I love the idea of a St. Bernard ploughing through the cover. That's quite literally the perfect word.
Well, I was going to say, if you were a woodcock and you heard a St. Bernard coming towards you, you wouldn't sit tight, would you? Nick, are you a dogs man?
Yes. It's an interesting question because it's very sadly last year, and I haven't replaced him yet, but we lost our dog who was a Hunter Pointer Retriever. It was actually a Corthell's Griffin, or what's called a German Wildhead pointing Griffin. They're quite like German Wildhead Pointers, Spinonis, that kind of thing. Really a brilliant dog and lots of fun. And I would 100% on that basis agree with the writer of the email. And great fun to have out shooting. To my saying, he wasn't brilliantly trained as a gun dog, but I did actually the lady breeder who I originally bought him from down in sort of not too far from Cirencester. I shot down there a couple of times, and she was picking up with 3 or 4 of them, and they were brilliant. You know, she got them properly, and they were very, very good and brilliant gun dogs. You know, as good as having anything else in the picking up line. Mine was not to that quality, but was a lot of fun, and they're brilliant family dogs as well, which is one of the sort of advantages of them. They want to be outside. They love being outside, and they love shooting. But at the same time, as soon as you get them back, you know, they want to be sitting on top of you on the sofa. You know, they don't want to be shut outside in kennels or anything like that. They're very much family dogs. So, you know, I'm all for diversity in the dogs people have out in the field. And I should add that my dad had a German Shepherd and used to take that out shooting with him, which was quite entertaining. Definitely not particularly good at any of the things it needed to be, but was quite fun to see out in the field.
Yeah, I saw a German Shepherd out last year, actually. First one I'd ever seen. I don't think it did much. It sort of followed the Labs and the Spaniels.
Yeah. And they have fun. I mean, that's sort of the joy, isn't it? They're just absolutely loving it out there. So,
yeah, I mean, the Border Collie is an interesting one because I think I've heard of, so this is a Border Collie he's mentioned picking up on a partridge shoot, but I'm sure I've come across keepers who have got a Border Collie for dogging in. You know, if you want something to herd poults for you, then what better than a sheepdog? I mean, perfect. Although I've always been given to understand they're quite hard mouthed, so I'm not sure I'd want a partridge that had been retrieved by a Border Collie necessarily.
There's a lot of Labradors that are like that, though.
True.
I'm totally in agreement with this guy.
I mean, so there's sort of 2 things about it, right? So there was quite a long story associated with this email that was sort of highlighting how he'd been on a shoot and had some of the other dog handlers had been rather sniffy, both in the beating line and in the picking up team about his.
Why don't we post these on social media? We should post after the pod's gone out. Why don't we actually just post the whole quandary on social media?
We could do. Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
We've been doing it for 5 years. We've never thought of doing that anyway. Because I'd quite like to know what people think about this generally.
Yeah, but I think so. There's kind of the light-hearted ribbing that sort of spaniel people might give Labrador people, and I imagine that that can be light-hearted as well. But I think if you're sort of sniffy about somebody else's dog breed in the one that they've gone for in a serious fashion, I think that's kind of mad.
That's like insult. It's a little bit like insulting someone's child.
Yeah, or for some people, probably exactly the same. Yeah.
Well, indeed. I'd settle that a little bit for the general population, but yeah. I think that I've noticed a greater variation. It's probably one for the census, actually, George. I've noticed a greater variation of gun dogs out on shoots in the last few years versus the few years prior to that. That's just a generic feeling. What do you guys reckon to that?
Well, I know that there was a question in this year's census about it, but I have not got the statistic to mind. I mean, we have a chap who brings his golden retriever along to pick up on our days. Now, it's a retriever, so it's not that unusual, but you don't see a lot of golden retrievers out on shoot days. Fantastic dog, this one, though. I mean, brilliant.
Yeah, I think in agreement then we are on the fact that this is his opinion is not unpopular at all. That I think that the reason there are so I forget what the exact percentage is, George. I'm going to try and remind myself. Labrador's the most popular at just over 50%.
Yeah.
Then it's Spaniel at like 40 something, and then everything else is about 8.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of terriers. Lots of shooting people own a terrier. I don't think they're particularly good at picking up. They're quite good in the beating line, and they're hugely entertaining. That's the main point.
Yeah, my brother had a Patterdale, now has a Jack Russell, and that generally is quite entertaining. But yeah, actually, the Jack Russell's relatively okay at picking up partridge, but whether they end up in the bag at the end of it, that's
Chris, when we were at Branches Park, Pete and his family have got, are they Frenchies?
Oh goodness, I can't remember. We drank a lot, George.
We did. But anyway, they've got. Oh, is it one Frenchie or two? I can't remember. But yeah, they're out in the shooting field. They don't do a lot of work, but they're fun to have around. But I think all the different breeds add to the gaiety of nations, don't they? It just makes it all rather more fun. So yes, I agree. A popular opinion. Stop being snobby about dogs.
Your point's right, though. You've got to be careful, because if it has not got a soft mouth, then that really is a no-no. Because that's the point of them. But assuming that, and I think there's a lot of dogs that have essentially trained themselves to be a decent retriever, then yeah, all for it, crack on.
I guess if I can understand if people are getting, if the picker's up, it's actually something is getting in the way of them doing the job they're there to do. That's obviously fair enough. But I mean, other than that, I think you've got to let people.
I should highlight that the full email, the story is where all the slightly sniffy pickers up had failed to find a lost bird, and he sent his pointer, his HPR, and wiped all of their eyes. So it's a very nice story. I think we must find a way of getting that whole story out there, actually.
Yeah, well, let's get it in a load of images on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah. Right, so Jeeves, Bran, and now you, Nick, are the newest members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters, and will shortly be in receipt of a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters. If you too have a shooting confession, quandary, or query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, or if you've got an unpopular opinion, or if you have a podcast selection or a forgotten drive to share, or a dream team to share, and you would like a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. Now, Chris, you don't know about dream teams yet.
Because I know about them. I haven't been on one.
Well, so you know the format. So it's you can pick 3 people to come on a shoot day with you, dead, living, and fictional. And you have to, obviously, you can't just send us a list of 3 names. You have to provide your justification for choosing them.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll have to get yours at some point, because I've done one. Okay. Sam, Avian, and Jake have done them. Oh, actually, on the topic of Jake, he's been talking about this bike ride he's going on.
He's on it at the moment, isn't he?
He's on it right now, cycling to Paris from the Guns on Pegs offices. For reasons that are slightly mysterious to me, but he's doing it.
Big effort. How many miles is it? A lot.
Many. Too many to cycle. That's the main bit.
Sorbonne territory. Nice.
Very good. Right. So, moving on. Nick, I think probably we better just start. I mean, I'm pretty sure that everybody listening to this will have a pretty good idea about who GWCT are and what they do, but maybe you could just give us a sort of elevator pitch, as it were, for what it is the GWCT does.
Yeah. So importantly, the GWCT is a charity, and at its heart, it's a research charity. So the beating heart of the GWCT is the science and the evidence we do on, in its broadest terms, sustainable land management. Really, now historically and still, a lot of the focus of that is around game management, both in the uplands and lowlands, and right across the UK. But it is broader than that as well, and is increasingly broader than that. We do a lot around farmland ecology, rivers as well, salmon being a big focus of our fisheries work. So really, it's there are particular species that we're interested in, but more generally, it's in my mind looking at what works and what doesn't in terms of managing shoots, farms, rivers, and everything else in between in a way that is beneficial for a pretty broad range of wildlife, and our charitable objectives are what guides us, and it is around the sustainable and conservation of game and associated flora and fauna, which can be read pretty broadly, and we do.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction, isn't it? And there are many wildlife and conservation charities out there. I'm sure people can think of a few. It feels to me like GWCT is different from a lot of them in that a lot of your focus is on managed landscapes. It's not the sort of nature reserve style of conservation. It's kind of accepting that 70% of Britain's landmass is farmed or managed in some way, and that if you want to have an impact, then you have to include that in your thinking. You're not going to conserve anything really but through nature reserves alone. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of what you do, and the farmland stuff. I mean, perhaps one of the things I think people may not realize about GWCT is that the idea of farm clusters and sort of landscape scale conservation is a GWCT initiative, isn't it, in the first instance?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We started that, and they have gone broader. We still work with many farm clusters, and more recently, while large scale collaborative models like the Environmental Farmers Group, which is a sort of more formalized, wide collaboration of farmers, but other groups now involved in that. Many farm clusters are sort of self-sustaining. It's just the local farms themselves who've put those together. But the idea and the concept was very much ours. And I do, I think we need to be careful not to sort of see there as being distinctions and clear dividing lines between farming and managing the land for agriculture and food production, and then shooting and game management and other things. I mean, as you will all be aware, and many of our listeners, a lot of this takes place on exactly the same land, and they have to work in sympathy with each other, and therefore actually us as an organization taking that sort of fairly broad view, I think is important, and actually it's helpful. It's the right thing to do.
Do you think the GWCT, out of all of the wildlife charities you might want to put into that bucket, do you think the GWCT is the most balanced in its approach for considering all the aspects of the environment? It's an angled question. I don't actually know the answer, but I sort of suggested it might be, but it was a genuine open question.
I mean, I think it'd be hard to think somebody who you would put above us in that regard. I do think, to George's point, there is a focus for us on working with landowners, land managers, gamekeepers, farmers, those who are actually on the land doing it and owning it. And so it's, you could summarize that crudely as, that sort of private ownership of land. And that is the vast majority of land in the UK. We do have the Allerton Project farm up in Loddington, but generally we're working with our members and our supporters on how they themselves can deploy the science and the evidence that we produce in a way that helps wildlife, helps restore nature, etc. So I think it is pretty broad in that regard. And I think the other aspect of that is we absolutely, it's clear and really at the beating heart of what we do that the science and the evidence is critical. And if it tells us something, then we have to follow that through, even if sometimes that is uncomfortable and leads people down uncomfortable conclusions. That is the sort of be all and end all for us. I'm not sure that's always the case.
I suppose, and what I find so interesting about this is when you talk to shooting related people, I suppose landowners, private land ownership is absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there. We care so much about lots of different things. And maybe what's slightly unfortunate with the name of the GWCT is that game isn't actually the be all and end all. And by everything you've just described, it's not at all. It just happens to be quite an important aspect. But it's actually more about balanced wildlife conservation or realistic wildlife conservation. Because everything you see from other wildlife or conservation, so-called conservation related charities, is so one-dimensional often. I find that there's just glaring exclusions from their thoughts, that like such as predator control, which is literally undeniable in any way, shape or form, the way that you can dice up that, and it might be really focusing on one animal like a badger or something, where obviously it's very complex. We've always said internally, the moment someone starts talking about the countryside, they go, I've got it. Before they even speak, you can go, no, it's more complex than that. And I just think that the GWCT epitomizes this of realism and balanced approach.
I think that's absolutely right. And you're, the example you point there, predator control, is a really good one, because there are just some organizations out there who don't want to go there, and you can understand why from their point of view. It might scare off members, supporters, donors, etc. And that's why they don't do it. But it does then make for an unbalanced debate and argument if you're just unwilling to address certain issues. And I think you're right. I mean, I would struggle, I think, to think of an area or a debate or an issue that we wouldn't want to go into on the grounds of any sort of principle. I mean, because of resources, there's only so much we can do. We've got to be smart about where we focus, what our research is looking at, etc. But ultimately, as I said a moment ago, we've got our charitable objectives, and those are pretty straightforward around the conservation of game and wildlife, and that's the sort of bottom line. How do you get positive results in those areas? Let's have a look. Let's carry out the research and come up with the answers as best we can.
Absolutely. I suppose where I'm wondering with this is, game, as your research proves, is so often the beneficiary of just great management and good practice. And actually putting game at the forefront of the name and forefront of the focus somewhat undermines the argument sometimes, because some people just assume that whatever they're about to say is just so one-dimensional, it could undermine the argument. And they've just been thinking about whether you were called the Realistic Wildlife Conservation Trust. It always goes into
that's got shades of the real IRA there. I think you need to be careful.
They weren't
the
realistic.
Real RSPB.
No, they weren't realistic. That was the crucial part of my word. But yeah, that is the point. Whereas if you went into this argument going, no, we're the sort of the balanced ones. Once everyone else has got their huge agenda out of the way, just talk to us. We're balanced. Game then benefits. And I just wonder at times whether this angle that, here come the pot boys, does it undermine, or actually could it be repositioned?
It's a very good question, and it won't surprise you to know it's a question that is raised a lot in lots of areas and circles, and is subject to a lot of active discussions and debates. And it's, I could spend a long time talking about all the different aspects of that question. I think the bottom line is you're right, and the other aspect for what we do, other than the research and the evidence, is then how we communicate that, how we get that out. We get, particularly with policymakers, it's important they understand what the evidence is and what works, what doesn't work, and they can therefore craft policy accordingly. And I think certainly having kind of game front and center complicates that, and it can be a distraction, I think, for the reasons you've outlined. People are, asking themselves or thinking about what it is that we are and what it is that we do, with the sort of game, in the front and center. What does it mean? I mean, the other point as well is increasingly for vast, amounts of the public, it's not a word that actually they're particularly familiar with. Actually. Yeah. For all of us and the world, where we operate, we understand it very closely, but we also want to reach out to a broader audience. It's really important that, the public understand what we're doing. There's increasing interest in conservation and nature and the countryside and all of these areas, and we have a lot to say about that. And the sorts of things you've just been discussing, Chris, around the difficult choices, the nuances, etc. It's important the public understand that and don't take an oversimplistic view of how you manage nature in the countryside. But so we need to find a way of appealing to them and being visible to them. And yeah, it may well be that the word game is unhelpful in that regard. Having said that, it's a very important part of our history. Yeah, it will continue to be an important part of the work we do. We're never going to stop looking at how game management can be done in a sustainable way, how it can benefit wildlife, etc., and answer some of the tricky questions which continue to come up around it. So it is front and center to what we do, and I can understand if some people are concerned or worried about what it would mean for us to drop that or to call ourselves something else. I do think it's a complicated issue. I do agree with you that it does create some barriers. I would finish though by saying I think we can kind of get a little bit too caught up in the name. There's no doubt it's important because it's the doorway, it's your sort of, it's your shop window almost. But actually, beyond just the name, there's a really important job for us to do in just being more visible, finding avenues to get our science across, communicate it in an understandable way as well, which is really important.
I think you've answered that really well, and the argument I would put out to any potential change, and the way I've always seen this is if you've got someone that's pro-shooting rocking up to some big public debate like in Parliament or something like that, the last thing you want them turning up in is a deerstalker or a tweed suit. You want them looking the same as everyone else, and I think that's what I would say in relation to the name, just from a marketing point of view. I think that would be the way that I would approach it to the shooting community.
Yeah, I wouldn't challenge that. I think it's the reality is we have to think about how we come across to people who don't really know us, who don't really understand us, and don't really understand what we as a sector as shooting is really about. And as you say, I think we need to think objectively about that and not just look inwardly. I mean, the other point is it's still quite a mouthful. I mean, I think even if you're not talking about game, and it's one of the interesting things I've found in the 6 months I've been at Post when I'm sort of introducing myself and saying what I do, that you're sort of halfway through the name and people are sort of looking at you in a bit of a confused way. And actually, for those who don't know us and who aren't very much in our industry, in our sector, it doesn't necessarily, it's not the easiest name to grasp, and it doesn't really obviously say what it is that we really want to be doing, which is that point we were talking about, which is very broadly about how you land, nature restoration, conservation, whatever you want to term it. But I would like to see us as a what was traditionally being called a conservation charity alongside all those other ones, and being shoulder to shoulder with them. And some people will have problems with some of those other charities and organizations, others will be supporters of them, but we should be up there kind of head and shoulders with them, alongside them. And the question is really whether our current our brand, our name, etc., is enabling us to do that. It's a complicated debate and discussion now. I don't think there's an obvious answer, but
no, I'm with you, and I'm just glad that we had it here, because I think the more that the debate gets spoken about, just because of the changing face of marketing and debate and positioning of shooting in the world, I think that conversation needs to happen. I think the more people that are aware of it can offer their opinion, and it will eventually find its feet, and sort of sentiment will end up deciding, I imagine, that what the right course of action is.
I've got a sort of related question, Nick, which is it's been a dramatic 10 days or so in rural policy making. Now, you came from the NFU. I think it's fair to say that some people in the countryside were not completely in love with DEFRA's, the government's policies in general, but I think, but I think, for example, people thought that Daniel Zeichner was quite a decent agriculture minister. We've now got a new environment secretary and a new farming. Actually, it's food and rural affairs is the brief, isn't it? I'd love your analysis on the whole situation. Really, is it a question of starting again from scratch? I mean, maybe there's an opportunity.
Yeah, well, I think that's you phrased it exactly right there. It sometimes it does provide an opportunity, but this is our 10th Secretary of State at DEFRA in 10 years. I mean, how many opportunities do you want to have to keep going back in and bringing people up to speed and explaining what all the issues are? That is in no way ideal. It does happen in other departments as well, but I think DEFRA is particularly bad for it. So it doesn't really make for good, coherent policy making. I think you could argue that, actually DEFRA policy, and actually it's not, I mean, it's more Treasury policy, I think, that has been having the impacts and the issues that those in rural communities are upset about. So yeah, more Treasury than DEFRA, but you could argue that this provides an opportunity for a reset. But I would be a bit skeptical about that, because, as I said, A, the Treasury pretty much remains where it is. B, I don't get the sense that the incoming Secretary of State and Farming Minister are necessarily, for any reason, going to be more sympathetic or understand any more clearly what the challenges were that rural communities are facing are. But you've got to work with whoever's there. That's the truth. We have a DEFRA Secretary of State, we have a Farming Minister, and those are the two people that we're going to need to engage with and convince to, at the very least, listen to us, because we've got a lot of important and scientifically justified stuff to say. But yeah, it doesn't fill me with huge amounts of optimism, another change at the top table. And it feels to me that it confirms my analysis of the last 14 or so months of this government, that I don't buy the argument that they are actively trying to sort of destroy the countryside or are against us or any of that. I really just think we are a very, very low priority. I think there's a sense that we can sort of look after ourselves, that generally those who live and work and are active in the countryside are in a more privileged position than many of those elsewhere in society and in the cities and urban areas. And so we're probably okay to leave to our own devices to look after ourselves. There's bigger fish to fry on a whole load of other issues. So, I stick by that, and I think that creates problems. But it does also create a little bit of an opportunity in which case, if our own destiny is in our own hands, then as a countryside, as a rural sector, then if we can persuade the government to get out of the way a little bit, maybe we should be left to our own devices to look after things and manage things, given that we often tell ourselves, and I hope rightly, that we know how to do it best.
Yeah, it's an there's obviously the other thing that's happened this week is there's been this the announcement that the expected ban on muirburn has been the expected extension on muirburn has come through. It strikes me that is one of those ones where you've sort of got two conflicting narratives about it, right? You have I suppose you'd call it the traditional land management narrative, which I imagine that GWCT, along with others, have been trying to tell that story about it, about the efficacy of cool burning and that sort of thing, versus the I can't quite think who it would be who's been pushing it, but there's various organisations and lobby groups and so on who have been pushing for this extension on the areas that you're not allowed to burn on. Is that a failure of lobbying? I don't. How has it become the case that the traditionalists, I suppose, approach story has failed to land within natural England? Is it something structural? Is it something about the way that that we've tried to get that message across? How does that happen?
If we knew the answer to that, it would be great, because we could do something simple about it. I mean, the bottom line, I think, is rural Britain is physically large, which is a ridiculously sort of trite thing to say, but in terms of population impact, influence, etc., is pretty small in this country. Smaller than many other large European countries. Yeah. That's been the case for a long time. Even if you look at, say, something like agriculture, enormously important in terms of the impacts it can have on the environment, social fabric of rural areas, etc. But it only contributes 0.5% or so to GDP. It's a comparatively pretty small economic sector, and that has unfortunately meant on those very sort of narrow grounds been often overlooked. And I think that's true even more broadly of rural pursuits and rural communities. So we are our governments are, particularly when they come from the left, are dominated by urban-centric MPs, policymakers, politicians. The civil service, similarly, even through Natural England and DEFRA, many of them don't come from rural areas. Some do, and I should say, I always think it's a bit unfair when people really wade into sort of DEFRA civil servants and officials. Often they're decent people doing a difficult job and often quite under-resourced. And I've met many who are actually very good, but I've also met many who aren't. And I think there is definitely a lack of inherent visceral understanding and knowledge of rural Britain there. And I think that is an issue. And so, but there are all these competing interests that pull in different directions. And sadly, this is particularly tough for an organization like GWCT, who are so science focused. It's not the case that you just produce the evidence and you come up with a good argument and you can walk away because it's so obvious. We know more and more, indeed, that actually just a good argument backed by sound science doesn't always win the day. There's a load of other factors, and that makes for, and to be honest, that does mean we've got to play that game a little bit as well when we think about how we communicate and how we advocate for our causes.
Yeah, and obviously, having been at the NFU for such a long time, you will have a lot of experience of working with government agencies and so on. you're not a scientist. So with your new role at GWCT, newish, 6 months have you been in? When was it? March? Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you worked out what your role is yet? Is it sort of government facing? Is it fundraising? Where do you see yourself as taking the organization, and what do you see yourself doing within that direction?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of that. I'm there to run the organization in its entirety and all of the constituent pieces. You're right. I'm not a scientist myself. Luckily, we've got some very good scientists in situ already, and a great team who manage all of our research and science work. So, I don't need to sort of come in and shake all that up. But I think what I hopefully can bring is the sort of strategic oversight of the organization. And for me, what that means is maintaining the quality of the science we do, which really is preeminent and highly respected, across the sector. Maintaining that quality of the science, making sure that it's directed at the right places, answering the right questions, the questions that landowners themselves want answered because they can see the problems that they're facing there, but also the questions that the public and policymakers want answered, because we have to pay attention to what the broader policy environment we're operating in is. So we need to make sure we've got good, focused, relevant research at the heart of what we do, and then around that, it's how we communicate that in an effective way, through our media work and our general communications strategy, through more sort of public affairs and advocacy with politicians. We are a charity, but that doesn't stop us from campaigning in pursuit of our charitable objectives. We can't be political, but we can certainly get involved with policy, because that is a way of achieving, as I say, the charitable objectives that we have. So that is a key part, is taking the science, but then getting it out there and communicating it. And then finally, making sure that it actually gets deployed on the ground. There's no point doing all this great work if it's then not actually happening and achieving the right results across, as you said, all of that 70+% of land that is farmed and privately managed, actually making sure that it gets out there as well. So, taking a strategic approach that the organization is as well set up as possible to do that is I think what I'm here to do. And you mentioned the fundraising, ultimately making sure we've got the financial stability and resilience so we can do all that really well. That does require quite a lot of resource. Making sure that what we do is understood, and all of those, many of the listeners, to this podcast, who have an interest in not just shooting, but actually shooting on really well managed shoots, who are doing good, who are having a net positive benefit on the land that they're operating on. And there's not just the game, but all sorts of wildlife there is benefiting as well. I hope that most of the listeners, if not all of the listeners, that is a really important part of what they do. And we are the guys who are absolutely at the forefront in demonstrating how to do that.
Yeah. That's something that it's in the heart of the mission of Guns on Pegs as well. Actually, it's something that we'd love to try and do more with. I don't know if I've spoken to you about it yet, but this is something we're really pushing towards, because to be honest, shooting, if it isn't net positive, in my opinion, doesn't have a leg to stand on in the future, because that's the way the debate will go. And listening to you talk about 0.5% to GDP, the way that the sort of country gets managed, 10 DEFRA ministers, there's such a short space of time for any of these people to make any impact. Parliament itself, in terms of tenure, is so short that, quite frankly, the fact that the countryside gets even any look in at all is actually quite staggering on those numbers. So we have to make it so easy for them to consider. And I'm pleased you answered without me asking the question about, do you think it's sort of deliberate, some of their acts, or just don't really care? And I've always wondered what's worse. Would it be worse for them to not really care about you or to hate you? I've always struggled to know what the best scenario of that is.
So when you break up with someone, or when you broke up with someone, is it better that they hate you or that they just don't think about you anymore?
It's definitely better that they hate you. If you're simply irrelevant, that they just sort of left.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, I think apathy is probably better than sort of downright hatred. I'm talking about the government's attitude to us, not what happens when you break up with somebody. Because I think you still then got a discussion and a conversation to have. And actually, for me, and I sort of implied it a little bit earlier, that still presents opportunities. I think actually one of the strongest cases that the rural economy, rural community, rural sectors can make with government is fine. You don't necessarily have to intervene too much or get too involved. There will always be things that government does have a role in delivering around environmental goods, public goods, and the like. Where things need some public support or a little bit of pump priming to make sure that they happen. So there is always, I think, a role for some public intervention and public money in rural Britain, particularly around the environment. But actually, the case that really is at the heart of what the GWCT does is if you make it economically viable for certain rural activities to carry on under their own steam, whether that's farming, whether that's running a shoot, whether that's forestry, whatever it might be. If you can do that and incentivize it and create the environment for that activity to go on, as long as it's legal, then actually it's a win-win. The government can take its foot off, it can step back, and it can allow us in the countryside to manage things in the way that we know works. And look, there's always going to be, you always need a little bit of regulation. It needs some oversight, it needs some monitoring, and we know that we have a responsibility to do things right. But actually, by and large, most people who run shoots, who run farms, who run estates, they want to do the right thing because they live there and they work there and they operate there and they see the benefits of managing that land in a sustainable way. So let us do it. And if we can get an economic return that makes it viable for us to do it, so that the government isn't having to pay for it, which is basically the alternative and the problems we have now because they don't want to, for understandable reasons. They haven't got money. Let us do it, but allow the economically viable activity to fund that. And that it's complicated because it's something with shooting. It's maybe fairly simple. If you can run a shoot and sell a few days, then that might enable you to continue to do that. And you want to do that, and as we've discussed, a sustainable way. With other aspects, it's about developing private markets for ecosystem services and natural capital, something, again, GWCT is very involved with. That starts getting more complicated, but it's a really interesting area with a lot going on. But, that does require government to allow us to do that and not keep sticking its oar in the way that it sometimes does, that everything, haywire.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting points about where shooting fits into this is it provides motivation for people to do conservation, ecology, environment, habitat work that doesn't necessarily require funding from government. A lot of the farming based schemes are incentives. They are financial incentives to do things. Whereas, if you're the sort of person who would like to run a shoot, you don't need a financial incentive to plant wild bird cover crops or to manage your woodlands or whatever it might be. And I think that that's always something that seems to have been missed, is the sort of voluntary nature of a lot of this stuff, and that it doesn't require funding from central government. So it seems to me there's an opportunity there.
Absolutely. But if you make it more and more difficult by putting in more regulations, more requirements and squeezing it, then that suddenly becomes, there's a threshold at which people won't bear the cost anymore. And that I think is what I'm saying, is that they need to step back a little bit and make sure that there is the ability and the freedom for people to carry on.
I think you've answered any other question. I had a bunch of other questions here, things I was going to ask you, but I think, to be honest, you've covered them in one way or another brilliantly. So there's a lot here for shoots to think about, a lot for guns to think about in terms of their impact and their role in all of this. And there is a ton of opportunities, you rightly say. It's carefully positioning ourselves as a countryside community within that conversation. And I'm really glad that you're in post, and good luck with it. So
here.
Yeah. Nick, the way that we finish these podcasts off is somewhat more lighthearted. It's with a segment that we call Desert Island Shooting. And the scenario is this. It's the extinction level event asteroid hits tomorrow. Your affairs are in order. Your loved ones and enemies have been reconciled. Your dogs are fed and your tomatoes are watered. Your last day begins how?
Well, I was intrigued when you flagged this bit of the podcast. I need to think about it by. I think you said that there's anything available, including a time machine.
Money, no object.
Yeah. I mean, I'll come to that in a minute. At the very beginning, Chris, you were talking about your back-to-back days earlier, and how nice they were, and how kind of simple and back to getting to the pub in the evening after the day and just having a good kind of drinks and a chin wag with your mates after day shooting. And I find it really difficult to look beyond that sort of day, as nothing really beats it. Actually, a pretty simple low bag day with a bunch of mates, where at the end of it, and you've got nothing to do the next day. You've got a kind of clear horizon, which if it's the end of the world, you definitely have. And you just kind of go to a nice pub with a roaring fire and just sit there without anything to sort of bother you. You don't have to be too worried about putting on any airs and graces. You're just kind of amongst yourselves and amongst mates. I find it really difficult to look beyond that. But to the time machine, the one thing I've always been really intrigued about, and it wouldn't really be a day, but it would be a sort of day wandering around watching a shoot, is and the sort of shoot that I think we definitely have not been talking about for the last hour or so, which is the famous story of the Marks of Ripon having 7 birds dead in the air at the same time, which always sort of ends up as a thing you end up talking about in the pub at the end of the day with your mates. It's like, how was that quite possible? And apparently, so I would just kind of love to go and just verify that happened. This is not any of us would advocate in this day and age anymore, but just as a sort of intriguing moment in shooting history, it's one of those ones that no one can quite believe, but apparently it did happen. So I'd get on my time machine, go and watch that moment, whether it happened or not, and then get back and have the sort of pretty bog standard shooting day that we all enjoy.
I love this. So you get in the time machine with your dog from your most recent dog, definitely, to be picking up behind the Marquis of Ripon.
Yes.
To watch the scenario. Then when it didn't happen, because it definitely didn't, when it didn't happen, to hear him go to 11s to his mates and go, I had 7 dead in the air, and you go, you didn't, and then get back in the time machine.
You would probably have been prevented at that point by his Batman, who would have taken you out the moment you opened your mouth to deny his amazing feat, which he was telling all of his friends about.
So you're back in the time machine, having avoided the Batman, and then you're on your day into the pub, being like, "You won't believe what I saw earlier." And I love it. It's a great use of Desert Island shooting.
Yeah, love it. Really good. Fantastic. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming along. It's been really interesting.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Nick.
Right, so before we go, all that remains for me to say is that there is a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sharing your unpopular opinions, your forgotten drives, your podcast suggestions, or your dream team suggestions. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode or any future episodes, we will send you some garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. But until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.